Good morning, good afternoon, and a very happy Monday, guys. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. Hope everybody is doing well. I am joined once more by the music aficionado himself, That 70s Rock Fan. Good morning.
Good morning to you, lass. Thank you very much for inviting me this morning. I have to say that there's very few people could get me up at this ungodly time in the morning in the Pacific. So only you and Elvis and a couple of others could do it. So I'm still asleep.
Well, we are very, very happy to have you join us this morning.
Oh, this is great. I couldn't wait. Can't wait to talk about Elvis and, the King. So thank you very much.
Yeah, because we had such a good time talking Meatloaf a couple of weeks ago. I thought, well, what's the next one that we could do? And since we were such, we had a mutual love of Elvis, we thought, wow, it's got to be the King himself.
So you're not getting too ambitious. You go from Meatloaf to Elvis. I mean, there's nowhere else you can go after that. You can't go
exactly.
Can't get any further up the chain.
Absolutely. But before we jump right into it, let me just say a quick good morning and hello to everyone. And so we have got Brandon, the anime guy. Good morning to you. Good to see you. We've got Gun Bunny. Hello, sweetheart. We've got the lovely Apollome's Minion. Good morning. We have got Psycho Dwarf 9. Hello, love. Good to see you. We've got D Bud Martin. Great to see you. Good morning. TZ Burton. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. Keely Chow, roll tide, Keely. Hey, Keely. We've got Low Spec Linux Laptop. Good morning to you. Good to see you. We've got Nearsighted Cyclops. Hey there. Good morning. Zachariah 315. Always good to see you. Good morning. I think Leah Rose was in Hello Sweetheart, and we had Eric K in as well earlier. And a good morning to Troy Pacelli as well. Good morning, love. And Jaden Hamilton, hello. Good to see you as well.
Good morning, everybody.
Hope everyone is having a fantastic Monday so far. And good morning to Dave G. Sound. Great to see you.
Oh, I like his idea, Elvis the Game. Oh, I'd play that.
That sounds good, actually.
What a great idea.
And Manowar 665, Neighbor the Beast, hey to you as well. Good to see you. So let's jump straight into it. When we were talking backstage. We were saying, how much Elvis has had an influence on you. Where did it start? How did you first discover him?
Well, it's like the Beatles. We've talked about this before. It was kind of always a part of my life. I mean, I was born in '63. It was my birthday yesterday.
Happy birthday! I didn't know that. Happy birthday!
So, being born in 1963, you grow up with guys like Elvis. It's on, and that was still fresh. He was still having contemporary hits. Movies were out. That stuff was on the radio all the time. So you're kind of soaked in it, whether you like it or not. But I critically, for me, I had an older brother who was heavily into rock and roll. So Elvis, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison, he was into those acts. That was his thing. So growing up, those albums were playing all the time. Now, also for me, my parents, well, my mother was into Elvis and rock and roll, but my father, who strictly speaking hated rock and roll, hated rock music, he was from a much earlier era. The one 8-track he had in the car all the time that was anything like popular music was Elvis's greatest hits. So there was a bit of an anomaly there, but that was playing all the time in the car. So you kind of get soaked in the records, and that was for very much the earlier records. The goods. Well, I say the good stuff because after Comeback Special, there was a lot of great stuff. So those rock and roll hits, Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, Jailhouse Rock, Heartbreak Hotel, they're just kind of soaked into you. So when I then eventually got into music in a big way in the sort of early 70s as a young teenager, whilst it was the denim-clad UK metal and hard rock scene, Elvis, you could see the connections, You know what I mean? You can see where those guys like Led Zeppelin who attended an Elvis show paid huge tribute to guys like Elvis. The Beatles. And I saw online and said before Elvis there was nothing.
Hmm.
So you can't help but get into it. And then you might at the time go, Elvis, that's old hat. And then you start listening to it again with an adult perspective. You think, my God, that stuff was good. He was good. He was special.
He really was. There was just something about him, and
Mm,
people, as you say, they can kind of roll their eyes and say, "Oh, Elvis," but I don't know anybody who doesn't have at least one favorite song of his.
exactly. It's and there's very few artists like that. Much as they like to claim many people are icons now or whatever. Elvis is a true icon in the true meaning of the word. There is only one Elvis. You see even a sketch drawing of it, it's Elvis. That's iconic.
He is. He's kind of a larger than life character. And let me just say a good morning and a huge thank you to Salty Texas C. Great to see you
Oh,
as
Corey,
always.
good man.
He says, "Morning, Elvis's gospel albums are absolutely amazing, but I ain't nothing but a hound dog." Absolutely.
How about you, my dear? How do you fall into the Elvis world?
I pretty much the same way as a lot of people in the chat are saying. It came from parents. My mum is a massive Elvis fan. It was either Elvis or the Beatles that we listened to growing up, and I just got an appreciation for him. And as much as I do like
Yeah.
the Beatles, I think they're awesome. There was just something about Elvis. I think because, as you say, he was kind of this larger than life character, especially later on in life, where he was so flamboyant. There was something about him that really kind of caught your attention. Plus, he was
Yeah.
very, very handsome when he was younger.
Elvis is devastatingly handsome, and there's no. This is why it's always so difficult to see him represented in movies and not documentaries, TV dramatizations. Not because they've not got some great actors like Kurt Russell playing the parts, but he's just so uniquely handsome looking. You can't find a second person that looks like that.
Mm-hmm.
So all they can do
Apart
is
from
come
obviously
close.
his twin that's sadly passed
Well,
away.
of course, yes, and that had a big influence on his emotional life. But you can capture the spirit and you can capture the feel, but I don't think you can ever look like Elvis because there's only one Elvis.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that, and I think we were talking briefly in the backstage. We were saying, because of how he was raised, you were saying that he is at heart he was a very polite Southern boy. It's who he was. He was also incredibly shy as well. It seemed, especially on stage. He had to have his guitar in front of him. It was almost something that he could hide behind.
Well, he had to learn that craft like everybody does, and for him it was a little bit harder, I think, in that the fame almost came before the learning the stagecraft. So when he went into Sun Records first with Sam Phillips and he recorded that stuff with Bill and Scotty, he had not done a lot of live performances up to that point. He'd maybe been a bit of strumming his guitar at high school in front of people, but he hadn't really performed. So with those first tours he did with those guys, he had to learn that craft. And I guess, as you say, the guitar, first of all, was a shield, and he could play guitar really well, as
You
you could
could,
see in
yeah.
the comeback special. But that was a shield. And then, as you said in the backstage, when it was taken off him, he had to learn how to do something that could keep the audience engaged. And then came the hips.
Then
Not
came
that I can do it.
the gyrations, yes,
Yeah.
which back in the day were very shocking, if I remember
Oh,
correctly.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
he caused
television
an
had
absolute controversy.
had a huge problem with him on television because of it. But I think he was showing his real inner spirit when he did that, though. And that he loved the music, and he just wanted to, like we all do when you're into the music, you want to get up and do something, and it showed his inner love of the music. He was steeped in it.
And it's certainly kind of it's cemented his fame, I think, because some of the live performances that I've seen, especially that particular one where he really kind of lets himself go and goes with the music, you can see the crowd react, and it's so funny. And that was something that just continued throughout his career. Then he would be able to whip the audience into a frenzy,
That's right, and
especially the young ladies.
that's right, and that's where he learned his stagecraft, because he realised that all he had to do was a quick wiggle and he'd get the screams, So he learned very quickly and became so confident on stage in the end as a result. But as a young guy, I think he had to figure it out, So that was part of it. Once that clicked, he went, Yeah, and of course he had Scotty and Bill Black and eventually DJ Fontana on the drums. A tight little rockabilly band, rock and roll band. So he knew that the backbeat was always going to be there. And so Salty Texas Sea said that rockabilly stuff is phenomenal. The Sun Sessions, we can talk about that a little bit more, of course, but that stuff is great. It's just acoustic guitar, stand-up bass, his Scotty's lead and Elvis's voice. There's not even any backing vocals in the Sun stuff. It's purely those instruments, and what they did with that was incredible.
It really was. And just to answer Soul Assassin, good morning. Good to see you. Says, how big was Elvis in England? Elvis was huge. He was incredibly popular.
He was
but the
about
one
5'11".
yeah, just under 6 foot, yeah. But the one thing that I think would have really kind of rocketed him into fame was if he had travelled. Now, that's the one thing that we talked about as well. Elvis was, he was pretty much confined to just performing in the US. I think he performed a couple of times in Canada, if I remember correctly. But if he had travelled worldwide, he would have been so much bigger. The crowds he would have drawn from Europe, from Australia, from the UK would have been phenomenal.
Oh, it would have been phenomenal. He did perform in Hawaii. I guess you could call that overseas. I'm just kidding. But yeah, Elvis was an enormous star worldwide. In the UK, he was huge. I mean, as John said, look, where Elvis was nothing. Elvis was the king everywhere. That was... Before that, you had a template that maybe had a Frank Sinatra or a Bing Crosby were huge stars, and huge stars overseas. There was nothing like Elvis. He was the first true international star of that magnitude, I think. That's just my opinion. Huge in Britain. If he'd gone to Britain, when you saw the frenzy when guys like early rock and roll guys like Bill Haley went, and then the Jerry Lee Lewis's, although he got a lot of press for other reasons. But those guys, like the crowds that they inspired were just enormous. If Elvis had gone, I think it would have just ground the country to a standstill. He was enormous. So, and I'm proud to say as a Scotsman that Scotland is the only place he set foot on in the UK. And he landed in the army at Prestwick Airport. So.
Yes, and it wasn't even because he didn't like to travel either. He was... and we can talk a little bit more about this later as well. He was pretty much confined to do what his manager wanted him to do.
Yeah, and that's a subject that we could talk about for hours. The Colonel Tom Parker.
Tom Parker, yes.
Or whatever his real name was. So Salty's question, I would refuse to, I'd say all of the above. I don't think you can answer that question. Both had very different voices. Both were magnificent, and I'm not going to choose between.
They were. I'm a big fan of Roy Orbison as well, and I'd love to do down the line a show about him as well. But very different voices. But
and I've been to his hometown in Texas.
Have you?
Yeah, I think it's Vernon in Texas.
That is cool. Big thank you to Salty Texas. Thank you, sweetheart, for that. Yeah, I think they're both iconic, but for different reasons. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd probably have to say that I think Elvis had a more of a range of material that he could do. Roy certainly started with the rockabilly, rock and roll stuff, but eventually turned into what I would call these magnificent little pop operetta ballads as his main material.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Sorry. Terrible. But yeah, so Roy's voice is very different, and it's all about the material then.
It was, yeah, absolutely. And Deepa Man said if only Elvis and Cliff Richard would have performed together.
Yeah. You see, this is how sad Britain is. America had Elvis, we had Cliff.
Yeah, Cliff. And nothing against Cliff. No.
I know, but he's just not Elvis. I mean,
he's just not Elvis as much as he wished he was.
He wished he was, yeah. He did have a great haircut in 1956, though, when he had this big bouffant hair thing. And Move It is a classic record, I'll just say that much. But that's partly the Shadows as well, of course. So.
is. And a big thank you to Brandon Anime Guide. Thank you so much. He says, music of that era was, is, always will be great. They set the stage for the awesomeness that came. Modern pop, in quotations, music is nothing but algorithms. I couldn't agree more.
That's right, and Brandon's put it very well, because I'm always struggling to say why it is I have very little interest in modern pop music. It's because it's algorithms, it's computer generated, it's auto-tuned, and there's only like 6 producers make it.
Yes.
And it's just churned out as product by the studios. The studio system now has, once again, we're in a period in history that it's got, the record labels have got total control over the product until the next independent revolution comes around. You know, there's always, every 10 years, there's something that breaks that mold. And right now we're waiting for that. I mean, you could say it's probably out there in the independent rap and hip hop worlds. I'm not particularly into that stuff, but although, as we were saying backstage, it's fascinating that Elvis's jumpsuit period. So you had the posse, the jumpsuits, the bling. A lot of those rappers and hip hop guys love that, and they see him as an inspiration. They love that. They go, Elvis, he had the bling, they model themselves on that posse. They've got a posse. He was the first guy I can think of that really did that.
He did. He pretty much he invented himself. You know, he went through different stages. You can think of the jailhouse rock look that he did, and then as he got older, you talk about the jumpsuits, and then he did the comeback. It's like each time he reinvented himself as something different.
He did, and we took at the time. I remember as a teenager, again being into denim-clad rock, was like, oh, look at those stupid jumpsuits and the bling, and he's got a jet and the posse. That was new. He invented that almost, and that's why those rappers and hip hop guys love him for it. So he was ahead of his time. We didn't know it then, but he was. So I still think it looks a bit silly, but you know,
it was, but it got people's attention, and that's you were saying about how modern music is very static now. It's very safe. The one thing that Elvis did do was he was a bit of a perfectionist. You know, he would do take after take until he felt that it was right. I think that's one of the things about him.
Yeah. Now, we were talking backstage about his songwriting and lack of songwriting.
What songwriting?
Yeah,
he didn't write any of his songs.
So he did have some credits on early stuff because Colonel Tom Parker insisted to those songwriters that Elvis was credited for royalties purposes, and that's a whole discussion on its own about the way that songwriters were treated and why a lot of them turned away from Elvis for years. But he whilst he wasn't involved in the songwriting particularly, he was exceptionally involved in the music. And I'm leaving aside a lot of the movie soundtracks because they were churned out as product. But up until that era, particularly the RCA early albums, the first album with that iconic cover. In fact, I'm going to call that up now if I can.
Yeah,
while we're talking. Hang on, give me a second here.
Absolutely.
If I can.
And Salty Texas said Elvis was really insecure after his military service. He wasn't sure if the rock audience would accept him back after his absence.
Just give me 1 second. Open with.
Absolutely, I'd agree with that. And hello to Isaj Melody. Good to see you.
So anyway, yes, whilst for some reason has opened in the Paint app, which is a bit weird because I never use Paint. Anyway, I'll share it anyway. So he in that era, so this album cover, forgive me for opening I don't know why it's opened in Paint because normally I open in a different app. This iconic cover, first of all, this is his first proper album because he didn't do a full album at Sun. It was just sessions and singles. He, in effect, produced these albums. Steve Scholes at RCA, who signed him from Sun for a record like $50,000 at the time, signed his contract. He wasn't really a music producer. He was an A&R guy. So normally he was producing these albums, but he basically left Elvis to get on with it. So Elvis was very knowledgeable about his music and about music in general. He was a Southern boy. He was steeped in country, rock, blues, jazz, the ballad singers, rockabilly. He went into that studio with the the limited number of musicians, and he produced it. He said, I want this arrangement. I want you to stand there. I want this mic'd up that way. He directed the engineers what to do. He produced these albums in everything but name. So he was, whilst he didn't write songs, he was extremely knowledgeable at his music, and in this period was in control of it. He lost control in the music, in the movie stuff, but he was in control here.
Absolutely, and you can tell the difference in the music. You know, he wanted how he had it set up. He knew exactly, as you say, what he wanted from the sound. And I think some people don't give him enough credit for that. They think, you know, Elvis, you know, he just stood in front of a mic, sometimes played a guitar, but he was really so much more involved than that.
Oh, absolutely. As I say, he produced those records. He was totally in control of that music. Same live. Had nobody, and he didn't have anybody to tell him what to do. Sam Phillips was say a good producer, and but he was gone by that era, and it was Elvis on his own, basically with his band, saying, "Well, how are we going to make this record? Got this song. What are we going to do with it?" And he produced it. So he was not unknowledgeable, and he was a good guitar player. Actually, I figured it out. So I'm going to just share another. Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Forgive me for being distracted. So that cover is so iconic that somebody mentioned the Smiths. Well, here's the classic.
Yes,
classic
Clash.
riff.
Yes.
The Clash, London Calling. That is a direct riff on that Elvis cover, and there's many others have done it, but that's
so cool.
stupendous. But yeah, he was much more knowledgeable at the music than people give him credit for. A lot of the later post-comeback special stuff, like the Memphis sessions, yeah, he had much more experienced musicians like James Burton on those sessions. But again, he pretty much self-produced it. He had producers there too and engineers, but the stuff that was recorded in Graceland itself, in the jungle room where they set up to record stuff, he was producing that. He was in total control of the band. So
And I think
never
that's
underestimate his musicality.
Yeah, I think that's where he was happiest as well. It seemed in the recording studio, as we've talked before. You know, he was quite insecure. I think he fell into a trap that a lot of people at that time did, especially big performers. People latched onto him that he probably shouldn't have listened to. The Colonel being the prime example.
We're going to get to that.
People that perhaps didn't have his best interests at heart.
Yeah, well, the Colonel. Okay, well, we'll do it now. I was going to talk about the good stuff, but we'll talk about the bad stuff. The Colonel was I forgive me if I sound harsh because I don't know the guy. I'd never met him. Obviously, to me, he was a fairground huckster.
Yes,
who had he was great at promoting stuff on that local level, literally fairgrounds. He managed acts like Eddie Arnold, and they would play at state fairs, and he would be handing out pens and photographs and whatever. And that was his level of management. Now, I guess to be fair, nobody had ever had an Elvis before, and nobody had ever had that level of world fame to manage. But it seemed to me the relationship was one of assumed father superiority to son, and Elvis deferred very often to his wishes. So no overseas to Mexican Iron. Happy 40th. Mike, buddy, I wish it was only my 40th, but happy birthday to you too. I'm so pleased we share a birthday, Mike.
Yes, happy birthday, Mexican Iron. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So yeah, I don't think he had Elvis's. Yes, he wanted to make Elvis a star, but I think the deal he took like 50% of Elvis's income. He had a huge gambling habit, which is why they ended up in Vegas for so many years. Couldn't tour overseas because he was a Dutch immigrant who never properly got residency in the States.
Yes, see, that was a story that was kind of bandied around for a long time. I was never quite sure if that was legit or whether that was just legit. A rumor. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's legit. I mean, again, I wasn't there. And so his deals, like the songwriting, he interfered in the songwriting deals. So what he said was, this is why Elvis's name appears on some co-writing of some early hits. We're not going to take your song Lieber and Stoller unless Elvis's name is on it too. So he gets 30% of the royalties, which meant he got 50% of 30%. And eventually, and the deal that they did on Elvis's song writing when he purchased songs for his catalogue was that it was all to be on the Colonel's company set up, and it was all, instead of the writer getting like 80%, 90% of the royalties, it was 50-50. And so the songwriters got a bad deal. And so eventually you saw the good songwriters turning away from providing songs for Elvis. So the material in the movie era particularly dropped. It dropped, the standard dropped quite a lot. Now that changed after the comeback special when he started to get good writers coming forward again, and maybe the deals had changed. I don't know the business side of it, and they were getting a better deal. So you had Tony Joe White and guys were writing songs for Elvis. He was recording some good stuff again. But that fallow period in between was because of the Colonel. He wanted to milk that cow, milk cow blues as much as possible.
He saw dollar signs, absolutely, and as you say, I don't think he was malicious. I think there was genuine affection that he had for Elvis, but like you say, he saw this as somebody who could make a lot of money, and he did his damnedest to get as much out of Elvis as he could.
It was very much a huckster relationship. How are we going to get this deal with this movie studio to make this piece of I don't care if it's a piece of shit. What's the deal? what cash am I getting? And
let's be fair, a lot of the films were not great. Let's say, I think he could have been a good actor had he been given better material to work with.
That's a great subject which I'd like to just touch on. But I just wanted to say to Corey, Salty Texas C, that, and I think Mr. CDV has answered it. I believe the only recordings you can hear are the $1 Million Quartet stuff that they did, which was really just incidentally recorded. They had the four guys in the in Sun Studios one night. Johnny Cash, Elvis. Guess my brain's gone blank. It's Carl Perkins and whoever it was, the four guys that were connected to Sun. And they did do some recording of that kind of off the cuff, but they were really just jamming. I don't think Elvis and Johnny Cash ever recorded anything together other than that. But I could be wrong. I'm just a fan.
I'm aware of,
Yeah, somebody.
I mean, obviously their paths crossed.
Jerry Lee. Sorry, it was Jerry Lee.
Yeah. Jerry Lee, yeah.
Well, of course, when you think of the photograph of them sitting at the piano, the hair, Jerry Lee's hair. Another good old Southern boy. But so the Colonel, before we go into the movies, which we spend years talking about those, the Colonel to me was a detriment to Elvis in the end, not a plus. And basically, you look at the history of early rock and early pop, 50s and 60s, there's a lot of those guys. So the guy acts like the Beatles were very lucky. Now, they got Brian Epstein as their manager. Not that he was particularly knowledgeable about the music business, but at least he cared very much for the Beatles. Like, he didn't want to damage them. I think if Elvis had a guy like, let's say, Peter Grant, Led Zeppelin's manager, who was devoted to that band and did everything he could to do right by them, much as he was an abrasive twat to everybody else. He did them right. If Elvis had a guy like Peter Grant to protect him, for Elvis to lean on and know he could trust, because Elvis trusted the Colonel, but he really shouldn't have much of the time. I think things might have been very different, the way things eventually turned out. So that's just my opinion. I mean, others may disagree, but I have a very low opinion of the Colonel. And
yes, I think the history will kind of have that pretty much same opinion. He was a guy, as you say, that saw a lot of potential in a young performer and did everything he could to promote, but to get as much money out of him as possible, and at the detriment to Elvis's health, unfortunately.
I think so, and I think he saw rock, like everybody did, and most people at the time, rock music, rock and roll is ephemeral. It's never going to last. So let's milk this. Let's ride this train. Let's train while it's a rolling. Let's keep riding this train. Rather than thinking of the long-term cultivation of an artist, it was let's milk this thing while it lasts, you know. So
Yes, and that's obviously where the films come in, as you correctly said.
well, the movies are interesting in that I think Elvis started out with the best of intentions, and it's very even the case today that rock musicians want to be actors in movies, and movie actors want to be rock musicians. The route established then with like Sinatra and Crosby and others was you have some hits and then you go into the movies. So it seemed like a natural progression. And at first, he really wanted to be an actor. He didn't even want to have music in his movies. So the first, was it Love Me Tender was the first movie. It wasn't even called that originally in the script, but because they wanted to, that was not meant to have any music in it. Elvis didn't want that, but of course, pressure was let's add some songs. One of them being "Love Me Tender," and of course that they had to rename the movie. You know, excuse me. So Elvis wanted to be an actor. He didn't want. He said, "I don't want to be relying on my songs to be in these movies. I want to act." So, but then they forced some songs in. Of course, it was a western, so they're not going to have any rock and roll in it. So it was all ballads and little acoustic ballads. But "Love Me Tender" is beautiful song and sung beautifully, but it was never meant to be in the movie. It was never meant to be called Love Me Tender. And then the next movie he did, Loving You, was I guess the one that set the template for what came to be. Elvis movie. He plays a particular type of character. It's got 8 songs or 10 songs. They're all released as singles on a soundtrack album. It's got girls. It's, Loving You is very much the template for what was to come. And they did, though, take a step. Things did take a step back towards the light for a while after that, because Jailhouse Rock, albeit it's a musical and was intended to be a musical movie, has some fantastic set scenes in it, like the title track. And Elvis's character was an anti-hero, so he had something to work with.
That was one of the more interesting ones, I think, and I think it's the one that was more challenging for him.
You're right, yeah, and he was playing like a juvenile delinquent almost, so that it worked. It gave him something to work with. And then I think he had what was his best movie, which was King Creole, which was actually a serious piece. It's adapted from A Stone for Danny Fisher, which is a book I've actually read, and originally was intended by Michael Curtiz, who we could make videos about, the Hungarian-born Hollywood director Michael Curtiz. He bring on the empty horses. That's his favorite phrase. Bring on the empty horses. So he originally wanted to cast James Dean for that property when he got the rights, but of course James Dean died, and there was Ben Gazzara and a couple of other guys were thought about, and then it ended up in Elvis's wheelhouse, and that's probably his best movie, King Creole. It's certainly a serious movie with Walter Matthau. Walter Matthau's a bad guy.
Yeah, he plays a gangster / manager, if I remember correctly.
Who Elvis goes up against, and it has some.
Carolyn Jones as well plays his mistress.
That's right, and it's a serious property with some great songs. I love the opening song in New Orleans, set in New Orleans, the Crawfish. And,
yes, if I remember correctly, it was also one of Elvis's favourite roles he played, because, as you say, it was a more serious role, and it was something that he could kind of get his teeth into. And it was also the last film he did before he was drafted.
Yeah, if I remember. That's correct. In fact, they deferred his start date in the army to allow him to complete it. I think it is his favourite. I mean, I've read that it's his favourite. So, and I can see why, because he actually gets to act, and he's actually pretty good. And I think, again, and after that, the movies reverted to the formula. So, Girls, 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 Happened to the World's Fair, Fun in Acapulco. That's an interesting one, because Elvis movies were banned in Mexico.
Really?
Yeah, there was apparently a couple of riots in Mexico City, his earlier movies, so he was banned. So he couldn't actually film in Mexico for Fun in Acapulco. Who knew? He's a terrible influence. But these followed the formula, and I think the only movie he really made after that didn't was a Western called Charo, which was actually not a bad movie and had no songs in it that I recall, although I've only seen it like twice. But
Yes, because the rest were things like Viva Las Vegas, Blue Hawaii, and as you said, they all follow pretty much the same template.
Well, they did. It's like, down on his luck guy, makes good, wins race, wins girl. And there'd be like 10 songs, of which one was good. Like Viva Las Vegas is good. The rest of the songs,
Not so much.
So they followed that formula. So King Creole for me was the peak, and it was for what he would have seen as a real movie, and it still stands out well today. And funnily enough, it was in black and white, and
It was, yeah. Obviously, quite a few of his early films were black and white.
yeah, they kept the budget down. Colonel would have liked that.
Yes. Gotta save those pennies, exactly. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So that for me, I mean, for everybody, I'm not unique, is the fallow period, the movie period, because all the music was meant to revolve around those soundtracks. So when you look at the history of Elvis's studio albums, there's actually not that many compared to the soundtracks. So Elvis would only go into the studio in that period occasionally to make an album, and he certainly made the gospel albums, which are great. But up until the comeback special, virtually everything was movie soundtracks, and they were just product.
Yes. And I think that's why he got so burned out, if I remember correctly, and that's why the comeback tour was so important and why it was such a huge success.
It was. Looking back on it now, and I think even at the time, people, and Elvis particularly, realised just how important this was. He wanted to get back on track with music. So, sorry, Salty's mentioning Anne Margaret. Elvis had impeccable taste when he had that fling with Anne Margaret in Viva Las Vegas. And obviously, you see the pictures of Elvis on the bike with Anne Margaret behind him offset. Well done, man. Well done, Elvis. One of my all-time crushes, Anne Margaret. So well played, sir. Well played. So yes, and there was some fun in some of those movies, but you would never claim they were great. But the comeback special, excuse me, still a bit of comeback special was so important. And originally, the Colonel had wanted this to be a Christmas special with all Christmas music. That was his vision. So Steve Binder at I think it was NBC. It was on NBC showed the comeback special.
I think so.
Sorry, I'm coming back. The deluxe set.
Yes. Oh, that's cool.
The deluxe set, yeah, I think it was NBC. Somebody might correct me. This is the deluxe DVD set I bought a few years ago. Probably on Blu-ray now, I don't know, but of the comeback special, brilliant package. It's got all the outtakes. It's got all the extended jam stuff. It's brilliant. But yeah, that Steve Binder, who was the producer of that, really, and I think it showed it very well in the Jonathan Rhys Meyers TV dramatization a few years ago about Elvis. Showed him taking Elvis aside and saying, "Look, I'm going to tell you the truth. You're seen as has-been. You're seen as a joke. The movies are not popular. No one's screaming at the door anymore, asking if Elvis has left the building." Yes, Brandon, I do have a hell of a package.
He says with a slight smile. Yes.
So he took him aside and told him these things, and Elvis realized that he knew, like, the movies were over pretty much. I got to get back to what I do best, music. And the special turned from a Christmas special, albeit shown at Christmas time too. Well, there's only one Christmas song in it, which I think is Blue Christmas, which they do
Blue
at the
Christmas,
Jam.
which I actually really don't like. It's one of the few songs of Elvis that I really can't
I think he
stand.
kind of over Elvises it in the original recording. He's kind of overdoing it.
It's almost like a parody, yeah.
That's right. He's parodying himself. He says, "I've got 10 minutes. Let's get this thing done." But yeah, that's the only nod they made to the Christmas special idea, is putting that in. They absolutely nailed that comeback special. I mean,
Yes,
you've
and
got the picture behind you there in the background. What a beautiful guy.
I love that picture. But he was incredibly nervous, if I remember correctly.
And look at that image. Just, isn't that incredible?
Again, iconic.
He was nervous. He was absolutely bricking it because he didn't know. He hadn't performed live for so long. Didn't know if he could still do it. But once, particularly the jam session, I mean, there's some. I love the whole thing, and I love the if you're looking for trouble, that whole set piece. I love the voice and that. Just and then the set piece at the end with If I Can Dream. The voice is just so powerful, But that jam session, the minute he starts playing the riff, maybe what you want me to do, and he relaxes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got the old band there with him, a couple of extras, but he's got Scotty and Bill, and he just relaxes, you can tell, and he starts having fun. And he's this singing, and he's howling, and it's just his voice is so good, like he shivers.
He gives it his all, and I think Brandon also mentions the 70, the Hawaii special as well. Both of those.
It's funny you should mention that.
Aha!
I have the special package of that too.
Of course. Now that one I remember obviously because of the jumpsuit, but you can see how much it takes out of him.
I remember watching it live on television, and for all that Elvis didn't tour the world, this was a first. I know the Beatles they tried it before with the One World thing that the Beatles did All You Need Is Love on. This was way bigger. The Elvis Aloha from Hawaii by satellite was broadcast around the world, and I don't know, 1 billion people saw it or something.
Yes,
it's a beautiful package. This beautiful package. Look at that. That's why the rappers love him, the hip hop guys.
Look at that.
Elvis can fly.
And anyone else that outfit would look ridiculous, but because it was Elvis, he pulled it off.
He did, and looking at the time, I thought, oh god. But looking back on it, I get it. It was unique. It was his style. Nobody else was doing that. So that show, that Aloha from Hawaii, was a first. So Elvis, he might not have toured the world, but he broke new ground with that global broadcast of that show. And I did watch it live at the time, and the comeback special, I was too young to particularly recall seeing. I was only about 5 years old, but I know the Beatles ceased recording for the night. I don't know what album, it was, a White Album they were making or whatever, and then went round to Paul's place in St John's Wood to watch that on TV.
That's incredible.
They broke their session to go watch that. So.
To be fair, I would have done also just to get to see that. And TZ Burton says, my mum saw Elvis live. I would have given almost anything to have been able to see Elvis perform live. If I had to pick someone from history, it would have been him.
Yeah, I think I would have liked to have seen him in one of his early shows with just the trio behind him.
Yes.
But then I would also like to have seen him in one of the post-comeback shows, post-Elvis in Memphis album, when he had the Suspicious Minds and that other material, that great material again. And I would love to have seen one of those shows in maybe like 1969. When he had James Burton as the band leader and playing guitar, and James Burton's still alive today, old guy, but he's brilliant Nashville guitar player, real quality musician. That was great to get him on board.
Yes, and then there's a couple of other things that I really wanted to get you to show, but just quickly because it's been mentioned in the chat. Anislin, good morning, good to see you, honey. She says, I hope Elvis is still alive. There's an urban myth that he slipped away and left a lookalike in his mansion, but his lookalike...
This is Bubba Hotep.
Yeah, Bubba Hotep. That's a great film, by the way. That is a really good film. But do you think that had Elvis obviously not passed away when he had he not had the health complications, do you think that he would have continued to be a star? Do you think he still would have continued to perform?
I think he may well have been, if he was still alive today, and I think he probably would be about 90 or something. I'd certainly be getting on a bit. I think he would have, in the intervening years, would have become, he would still have been big as a recording artist, but you would have seen him collaborating with many, many people, because he would be the elder statesman. Just imagine if you'd had Elvis being able to collaborate with younger rock artists. what they've been able to do with these music since, and like the Viva Elvis show, which I went to in Vegas.
Yes, you mentioned that as well. Yeah,
I went to Viva Elvis. Not many people can say that. The remixing that they did of that, and the a little less conversation, the things that
yes,
they've done.
JLX.
Yeah, he might have been able to get physically involved in things like that and revisit his catalogue and do some stuff with it. Imagine who he could have worked with, the producers. Imagine Rick Rubin or somebody working with him, or imagine working with a Dave Grohl or something. What
Yes,
Elvis could have done.
I would have loved to have seen that. Even if he didn't tour, I would have loved to have seen him continue and kind of still being an influence, I think would be the best way to put it. But as you say, he had 25 years after he died, he had the #1 with JL with Little Less Conversation.
I love that remix. Yeah, and I love the Viva Elvis stuff. The Viva Elvis soundtrack is brilliant from the Cirque du Soleil show. Yeah, and it's the remixing of it, and actually the reason that show wasn't at I think it was at Aria, the hotel it was at in Vegas. Yeah, we went to it, and I think there was a couple of reasons it didn't succeed in the long run, even though the music was great in it. First of all, unlike the Beatles' Love Show, which if you've ever been to, is very much in the round and stuff's happening above you, and it was static because it was on a stage in front of you. So really, Cirque du Soleil were limited in the things they could do.
Yeah, and that's an odd choice for Cirque du Soleil because they are so well known for being, you have the performers all around you. It was a very odd choice for them to do.
It was. Love worked perfectly at the Beatles show, which I've been to a couple of times in Vegas. That's worked perfectly because it's all around you. Viva Elvis was very static, and it portrayed, the narrator was Colonel Tom Parker, and it portrayed him as this kind of nice guy that was on the sidelines watching things going up and down for Elvis. No, we were at the time, we're looking at each other going, that's not very good.
Not really, no. Artistic license with that one, I think.
Like the license should have been revoked, I think.
Keely Chow mentioned it, and you've actually been as well. He was talking about how he visited Graceland. What was that like?
Oh, one of the greatest experiences of my life. There's no hyperbole there. It was a brilliant experience. And I do have some photographs.
Absolutely.
If we have time.
We've got plenty of time. I want to get to that beautiful painting behind you as well.
Oh, well, we'll do that right now, actually, because it's so. Forgive me, I'm going to switch to a different camera. So while I explain the nature of what's sitting behind me here.
Yes, and this was one that you mentioned after we'd finished the previous show, and I just had to get you to bring this down because it is incredible.
We all know about Elvis's gold lame suit. I'm going to be away from my microphone briefly. So, in fact, you can see on the 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong album up there. He's got wearing the gold lame.
Yes.
So there was an edition of Rolling Stone, which called Portraits, which had the gold lame suit on a coat hanger, like this. So we decided, we had a friend that was a really good artist, and we said, could you paint a painting of that? So this is what she did for us. This is an original painting. It's about 5 feet high of that gold lame suit on the coat hanger.
That is incredible.
This is a unique, one of a kind. No one else in the world has got anything like this. Signed by the artist.
She's incredibly talented.
She was incredible. She did a few things for us, but this was one of them. So this is, whilst we're in this apartment, it's just kind of sitting here. But when we get our next house, it will be in, as it was in the previous houses, in a special place with the proper lighting above it and whatever, because it's unique.
That's something that you've got to have in the perfect place to show it off in all its glory.
Yeah. So when someone says, are you an Elvis fan? I say, well, I don't know what a fan is, but we've got this. Now,
Elvis, never heard of him.
Yeah. Now, above it is and also a unique piece of art that my daughter did of Elvis.
Oh, that is
if you get up close, it's all blobs of paint. Mm-hmm. It's that kind of thing, but it's the Elvis, young Elvis. It's another really cool piece. It's unique. Nobody else has got that.
That is beautiful.
So that's two of my And I've got some recommendations of things as well. So first of all, I'll go back to my, because you obviously want everyone to see me. So I got a recommendation of a movie.
Oh yeah.
We'll come back to talking about Graceland, but Mystery Train.
Mystery Train. Okay.
Young Japanese, Jim Jarmusch movie. Young Japanese couple go to Memphis. They're Elvis fans. They go to Memphis, and it's about that trip. Brilliant movie. Really captures the atmosphere of Memphis, and it's got a lot of the Sun era material and the like Blue Moon and stuff like that in the soundtrack. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. Very haunting, atmospheric. So Mystery Train. Elvis isn't in it, but it's about Elvis.
I've never heard of this film. I'll have to check that out.
Jim Jarmusch is the director. He's quite a well-known cult director. So if you've ever seen this or never seen this, grab a copy of that. It just gives you that atmosphere of Memphis that Elvis grew up in. I mean, I was born in Tupelo, but he grew up in Memphis, and that's melting pot of blues, jazz, rockabilly, country. Everything in the world, the African American influences, because it's hugely dominated African American city. It's just he was steeped in that. And this movie kind of shows some of the old buildings and diners. And it's beautiful. And this Japanese couple who love Elvis.
Elvis is incredibly popular in Japan as well, isn't he? If I remember
absolutely.
correctly. Yeah.
Again, the bling helped, because you know what Japanese are like. They love their pop culture, and they love the shiny pop culture alongside their history. Also, if you want to read, and forgive me for doing this, because this is just me. If you want to read, to me, the best books ever written about Elvis were written by Peter Guralnick. And there's this one, Last Train to Memphis, which is like
that one I recognise. Yeah.
and then the Careless Love, the follow-up. So the two books are the entirety of his life, and if you put them together on the side, they look like this. If I can get it to go, there you go. So those are my favourite Elvis books. I mean, again, none of us were there. How can we tell if it's true or not? To me, these are the most accurate depictions of his life.
Yes.
Sidetrack. Sorry, I had to show you my... Oh, this shirt, by the way, I bought at Lansky's in Memphis, where Elvis used to buy his clothes. So
I love that shirt. And you were pointing out all the little icons on it as well.
It's got Graceland gates in it. Yeah, it's all Memphis stuff.
So it's amazing. So what is Graceland like? Because it's on my bucket list of places that I would love to visit.
It was for me, it was a very special experience. So I mean, we loved Memphis. Hang on, I'm just about to open that folder with those pictures in it. I'm trying to. My computer's decided it's not going to behave. So we went there. Oh, here we go. Right, it's working. So first of all, what struck me about it was that unlike today's mega mansions that stars have, it's actually quite modest.
Huh.
Yeah, I mean it's big, but it's like particularly out the back. There's room for some horses and stuff, but it's not got like 5 floors and 600 rooms. It's actually a very modest place compared to today's star mansions. Excuse me, it's nice. Very much in Elvis's style. The jungle room, his den downstairs, which must have been great. That's where the Beatles met him. They went downstairs to his den. He had all the TVs. Had the bar. He had the great couches. It must have been great hanging out in there with him. Actually, when the Beatles met him there, they walked in and he was sitting playing a Fender bass and singing along to something. So Paul and John picked up some guitars and they started jamming. And after the initial, oh my God, it's Elvis, you know, he said, are you just going to sit there and stare at me all night, or are you going to do something? But anyway, if you go to Graceland, it's got a number of things. Obviously, you tour the house and the grounds out the back, but it's got all these annexes where it's got all the memorabilia. So the suits, there's the comeback special leather suit.
That is amazing.
There's the red one that he sings one of the songs in. I think it was the Trouble one. I might be wrong. Set piece. There's the front door. again, very modest. I mean, it looks great, and yeah, I couldn't afford it, but at the same time, based upon the mansions the stars own now, it really wasn't, and it's beautiful. It's very much a southern place. There's some of these cars.
I love that car. Oh.
Now look at that. This is the Cape. This is like 1972 era. It's just, and there's room after, and he had two planes there, but this is the TCB.
Yep, it's Ash Melody says his plane's just across the street.
That's right, they're across the street, yeah. So you got to walk across the street to see that stuff. Yeah. This is the Den. I mean, it's very 60s and 70s, but it must have been at the time.
I like that aesthetic. I think it looks great.
I love it. I mean, even the yellow carpet seems to work. Yeah. Maybe it wasn't yellow to start with, I don't know. But he's got a jukebox and everything. So this is me and Mrs. Rock fan. I was a bit overweight at that point. So.
That's a lovely photo.
In front of the gates. Lovely apart from my gut, but it's gone now. And then there's all this stuff. Just room after room of gold records, of special album covers or presentations. There's out the front. Now, it's starting to there was a storm coming, which is important for when we get to some of the later photos, because something really weird happened. So there's the front gates. There's Chubby at the... and you can see there's the other plane.
Oh, the Lisa Marie, yes.
Yeah. There's the dining area. You couldn't go upstairs. You can only go downstairs. Upstairs was the private family rooms.
I was going to ask, is it still privately owned, or is it an actual, like, a museum?
I thought it still belonged in the family, but I'm not entirely sure if that's still the case. There's the pink Cadillac.
Oh, the pink Cadillac. Yeah. God, I want to drive that car so badly.
It's so beautiful. There's the gold lame. Just brilliant. Love that suit.
Very few people could pull that suit off.
Virtually nobody. Bono tried, but he's a dick. So
yes, I'm not a U2 fan. I've got to admit.
No, he's a wannabe. And just gold discount. Now, so we got to the area out the back where Elvis, his parents, and so on are buried. Literally, the second we got there, thunder and lightning.
Oh my gosh!
Began. The storm hit, and there's lightning flashing all around. And thunder, there's this peal of thunder just as we got there, and I took this photograph. So it was the weirdest thing. So I'm saying Elvis is talking to us. He's talking to us. That's what I thought. Elvis is talking to us. Yeah, it's weird, and these are not in order. Forgive me, but.
Yes, and just quickly, good morning to the Star Wars guys. They said, so last year they went to visit on a cross-country trip. They stopped at Graceland, and sadly the outer wall was riddled with graffiti.
Well, it is, although some people see that as a feature. It's the same at Abbey Road when the wall's always getting written on, and then every so often they'll clean it off and it starts again.
Okay, so people just signing the wall basically to say they've been there.
So they just... there's an example.
Oh, okay.
I don't mind it so much because it's a way of people saying I was here and I love Elvis. And I can understand why people wouldn't like it, but I didn't mind it. And same at Abbey Road. I just only took a picture of that because I'm from Edinburgh, so it's full of little messages. Always on my mind. You were always on my mind.
One of my favourite songs.
I love that song. See, Elvis was. When he did a good ballad, well-written ballad, was supreme. He could do the great rockers like, the early stuff, Hound Dog and whatever, and Big Hunk of Love. That's my favourite.
Yeah, Burning Love. I love Burning Love.
And then he could do these beautiful ballads. So it was great range. And somebody mentioned earlier it was a baritone, which is unusual in rock and roll.
We think of his American trilogy as well.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, and and at the time as a kid, well, a teenager, I thought that's a bit hammy. But when you listen back to it as an adult with more perspective, you understand what he was doing and how well it was arranged and performed.
You do. It's Ash Melody's got a couple of questions. He said, "Did you get to eat some muskrats while you were there?"
Probably, but I might not have known.
And did you have a Spinal Tap moment?
My whole life is a Spinal Tap moment. I'm the drummer. or one of them. No, Spinal Tap is part of me. But yeah, look at that. This is when he was learning how to perform and get the crowd going crazy.
Yeah, he certainly did.
Yeah. More cars, but there's inside the TCB. Even yellow. I mean, who can pull off yellow under any circumstances?
Yellow, green, and orange. Yes.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful? Wouldn't you like to travel on that? I'd travel on that.
I'd travel on that.
Get yell ahead. So we took a bunch of pictures. This is a bit blurry, I'm afraid. This one. This is like the formal living room area with the piano. And he was a great piano player. He was a good musician. He could play piano, guitar, bass, without a problem. He did play some bass and guitar on his records.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, he just concentrated on singing.
Yeah,
so hired James Burton.
Yeah, because of his gospel upbringing as well.
Yeah, a bit blurry, I'm afraid. This is out the back. As you can see, it's not that big.
Yeah, I mean, considering that this house belongs to Elvis, you would think it would be a lot more flashy, a lot more over the top. But like you say, it just looks like a regular house.
It's a mansion, but it's a small one, But I mean, a big improvement on the double wide that he used to live in. So,
Yes.
You can see Dr. Strangelove on one of the screens there, and there's some Western Clint Eastwood on the other one.
Do you think Elvis was particularly materialistic? He didn't really strike me as being so, other than having a love of cars.
No, I don't think he was. And there are lots of tales of him giving stuff away to people. Like he was in a car, it may be apocryphal, I don't know. But he's in a car dealer in Memphis buying a Cadillac or whatever. And there was some black woman there who was like, I wish I could afford this. He bought one and gave it to her. Now, that could be apocryphal, but it could be true. He apparently was very generous, which is why I ended up nearly broke.
Yes, Eastland says that as well, that the money was spent on family and friends.
Yeah, he didn't particularly accumulate. He didn't buy hundreds of houses, or he had a place in LA because he was working in movies.
I would imagine paying off the gambling debts as well didn't help.
Paying off the Colonel's gambling debts did not help, because when he died, he was almost bankrupt, Elvis, because of things like that. This is the jungle room, where he recorded Suspicious Minds. So he had some sessions in here. And the water that comes down the walls.
What I imagine the jungle room to look like, because that just looks like a den, but it does look awesome. It does,
but there's actual water coming down here. It's a water feature.
Nice.
Yeah. See, it's not got a huge pool. It's not like it's... I found it very tasteful in a lot of ways.
This is awesome. Like I said, it's on my bucket list of places that I would love to visit one day.
There's the modestly understated.
Yes.
So that's my Graceland photographs. I do have a couple, and forgive me for. I hope I'm not boring everybody with these, but there's lots of these. This is Sun Studios, and I wanted to talk about this because it's quite important. Because Sam Phillips and Sun Studios it's like right place, right time, right person. Same with the Beatles and some of the stuff that happened to them. If you don't go in the right place at the right time with the right guy, nothing will happen.
Yes.
So he wandered in
Johnny
there.
Cash had a similar experience as well, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
So he went in there, as everybody knows, to cut a record for his mother as a gift. Because Sam Phillips, one of the things he did was you could go in and record, and he'd give you the 12-inch acetate or whatever, and you take it away. And so he went in there to record a couple of songs for his mother for his birthday, and Sam Phillips went, something in that guy's voice. He was just a truck driver at the time, Elvis. So, he brought him back to try and do something with him, and then that's when all the magic happened. So, and just a little local, regional studio, Sun.
Is cool.
A lot of small artists, blues artists, R&B artists. The inside the studio, because you can go in, it's tiny. I mean, it's the size of a living room.
Of course it is.
And so you've got this, and the X's are on the ground where the three of them stood. So Elvis, Scotty, and Bill. Just two, acoustic guitar, electric, stand-up bass, and Elvis singing. And they're facing each other. That's how they did those sessions. It's just incredible. My God, I'm handsome.
That's a good photo. I love that.
And there's some of the memorabilia of it. So Sam Phillips recognised this is the equipment they had. I mean, it's not like now when they get like 500,000 digital tracks and every tool, Pro Tools in the box.
Look at the size of that thing.
Look at that size of that tape player. They had like one track and some echo. That was the production. But he recognised something in the voice. So the tale, which I'm sure we all know, is that Elvis, Scotty and Bill went in there and they're trying out stuff. And Sam Phillips is saying, no, that doesn't sound right. That's not good. And they're formally trying to record things and it just wasn't working. Mm-hmm. So he said, take a break. So when Sam took a break and he went out, he came back in, he found them jamming That's All Right. The song That's All Right, which is old Arthur Crudup blues R&B thing. And they're jamming it because they were just having fun. And he said, that's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. Elvis was going, that's all right, mama. You know, rather than the very restrained Elvis that had been trying to do things formally. He said, that's what I want. And he hit the button, recorded it. History was made. You know, it just the right guy. Nobody else would have persisted or even recognized anything necessarily.
Mm-hmm. But and he Sam saw Phillips, something in him. Yeah. Yeah,
and Phillips treated him with great. So you see some of the Johnny Cash stuff that Sun recorded, and the beauty of that is there was no. He allowed Elvis to learn and express himself. And those songs, those Sun sessions are beautiful. Like the song Blue Moon, not Blue Moon of Kentucky, which is also brilliant, but just Blue Moon. It's virtually only Elvis singing with some echo and a sort of a background, you know, somebody kind of just tapping a guitar or something. Absolutely spellbinding. And people used to say to Sam Phillips, well, why did you sell his recording contract to RCA? He said, well, it was $50,000, so it meant I could keep the studio running and I could record all these smaller artists.
That was a lot of money then, yeah.
It was. So you could have kept Elvis and become huge. He said, well, I couldn't even make an album with him. I didn't have the money to promote an album nationally. You know, he didn't have the resources. He was just a tiny little local studio. So he sold to RCA and kept the studio running. He allowed him to record other artists, particularly black artists, that would never have got records made otherwise. So.
Yes, but like I say, he really, really did see something in him. And then to say, you know, $50,000 was a lot of money back then. I mean, you think that Elvis bought Graceland for $100,000 in 1957. Yeah. So it's a considerable sum.
It was at the time. Yeah, it was big news. And I don't know if RCA knew what they were getting, but to stand there in that spot, in that studio, I mean, for me, that was chills. It's like you're standing with rock and roll history. Rock and roll was born in that moment in that studio. You know, in my opinion. Yeah, there are other rock and roll artists and rockabilly artists. Elvis was the guy who distilled it all into this thing. Without Elvis, I think, as John Lennon said, and I said earlier, before Elvis there was nothing. Yes. And now he was being over-exaggerating it, but he was the distillation of everything that then became, we wouldn't have rock music as we know it today without that moment.
Well, that, and I think it's safe to say there will never be anybody else like Elvis. You know, there's been plenty of people that have tried to replicate what he's done and imitate what he's done, but they're not him.
No, they're not. We've seen many people try and fail. And,
yes.
You can't capture lightning in a bottle, really. No, I mean, there's only one Elvis.
There's only one Elvis.
There's only one Beatles. There's only one Elvis. It's just there was only one Michael Jackson. There's certain people have just got that thing.
Yes, there is a story, and I think Gun Bunny and a couple of other people mentioned it as well about his twin. I think Elvis said that he had a dream once, and he said that Jesse was next to him on stage. They both had guitars, they were in matching outfits, and Jesse was the better singer. I thought that was a really sweet story.
Sweet. He very much lamented the not knowing his twin, you know.
Mm-hmm. Can you imagine them both on stage together?
Well, it would have been like the Everly Brothers, but with sex. But yeah, there's only one Johnny Cash. There's only one Jimi Hendrix. You know, there's certain people have just they've been touched.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the Clash are great, but you know, the Clash have existed without Elvis? I don't know. Would anybody have existed in the same way? It's hard to say. But
It is hard to say, and it's hard to say how many artists, as you say, have been touched by him. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, we've got a new, I don't know whether it's a biography, it's kind of a drama musical coming that's just had the trailer released by Baz Luhrmann. What were your initial thoughts being an Elvis fan?
So, let me just cancel that. There you go. Well, first of all, I have this knee-jerk reaction now every time I see something to go, well, you know what, I'm going to reserve judgment to see what they do with it. You know, like it's the same with any genre. I'm going to reserve judgment. Before I would have been like, yeah, I can't wait for this, you know. So I watched it. I've watched it a few times. First of all, it's definitely Baz Luhrmann, you can tell.
Yes, it is.
Romeo and
Yeah,
Juliet
it's
Moulin
definitely got
Rouge.
that stylized look.
Yes. I was encouraged by some things in there. Now, you're never going to get an actor that's going to look like Elvis.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the actor they've chosen can sing, so that's probably the compromise that you
does.
make.
Yes, I think Austin Butler, like you say, doesn't particularly resemble Elvis, even if you squint. But if that is him actually singing, then yes.
Yeah, and I think it's more about the attitude and capturing the spirit than it ever is going to be just looking like Elvis. So looking at the stages of it, first of all, it does seem to cover a large part of, or all of Elvis's career. There are shots of each stage in his career, so it's not just focusing on the early stuff or the later stuff. So that to me is good. I like that. It's gonna, hopefully, it looks like it's going to be sympathetic towards Elvis. And show Elvis's material in its best light. I like the fact that Tom Hanks's portrayal of Colonel Tom Parker appears to be one of someone who might be seen as manipulative or appealing to Elvis's emotional nature.
Definitely, he's gone for the, as you correctly said, the sideshow kind of huckster look and feel about him. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we don't know because we all have got this trailer, so it could be it doesn't turn out like that. I think the way they're portraying it is, and there's certainly Tom Hanks is doing a good accent because having the Colonel speak in real life, it sounds pretty close. I think they're portraying him as what he kind of was, which was, I've got this young shiny object, and I'm going to make that work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Again,
a lot of emotional manipulation.
Dollar signs, yep.
Yeah. And it looks like it's got some great set pieces. I mean, you see, maybe again, it may be an exaggeration, but they're certainly showing, you know, the set piece with Elvis in the black church. Elvis loved gospel. He did go to black churches. Memphis was hotbed of gospel, blues, Delta blues. He certainly attended those. He was on Beale Street all the time, watching artists in bars, whatever. Very much immersed in that scene. And certainly, I mean, there's been a lot of debate about Elvis's attitude towards black people. I think he seemed like he was, for the time, was remarkably non-racist. Time and place, and he loved black music. So those scenes with him in the gospel, it could well have happened. I mean, obviously, it's exaggerated because of the Baz Luhrmann movie stylistic piece, but it could be a proper representation of his love of that music.
Yeah, I am curiously optimistic about it. Like I said, I actually was surprised. I enjoyed the trailer, especially the extended trailer that's been released. I thought that was actually pretty good. This isn't out, I think, until June. I think it's late June. Yeah, 24th, I think. So it's something that I'll definitely be keeping an eye on. Whether or not I go to see it at the cinema, I'm not sure. But I'm curious, definitely.
I'm optimistic. I mean, one thing they couldn't do with Elvis was race and gender swap him, so that's And they're
There's-
not going to make him gay or
there's-
anything.
yeah,
You know.
like I said, there's plenty of those Elvis impersonators out there if that's what you want.
Yeah, you can get any flavour of Elvis impersonator you like. But hopefully they're not going to make him gay or anything, because he wasn't. But in fact, there's a
No.
book called Baby Let's Play House, which is all about the women of Elvis, which is quite good.
Oh yes, that's another subject for another time. But Elvis
Yeah,
was
they talk about
definitely
his-
a lover of ladies.
They talk about his marriage to Priscilla, but he had plenty of ladies after they split. That's for sure. But yes, it's I'm cautious like you. I'm cautiously optimistic. I just want to see a fair representation of the guy, not to have him torn down.
Hmm.
No, it's not a whitewash. I mean, no one's perfect, but Elvis, to my mind, when you look back at him, there's very little I could criticize about him personally as a human being. You know.
Hmm. Yes, though you can criticize some of the choices he made and some of the
Yeah.
people he listened to, perhaps. But I think as a person, he seemed to be a nice guy. It's like you say, he was raised to be a very polite man.
Yeah, and respect his elders, respect authority. Not that that's a great thing, and necessarily respecting authority, but he was a good Southern boy, well brought up. Loved his mama, which but he was not
Yes, when she passed, that absolutely devastated him, didn't it?
Oh
If
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Because Vern, his father was again played very well by Robert Patrick in one of the dramatizations. Is kind of not a weak guy, but certainly not as strong as figure as you'd want. He was more of a stayed back rather than dominant. I mean, he loved his father, but he seemed just like a good guy, you know. Yes, he would obviously suffer the ills that all stardom brings, and certainly building the posse around him. But as the Beatles said again, that John said, there was four of us. They get in the hotel room after the madness, and they knew they all could experience that together and support each other. Elvis was on his own. There was no one else. There was only one Elvis.
he always struck me as quite a lonely guy.
Yeah, he didn't have that close collaboration that those guys had. Yeah, he didn't have anyone to collaborate with. It had to be him. And therefore he listened to people like Tom Parker when he maybe shouldn't have so often,
I just wish he was still with us. If not now, I think he had a good many years still to give. I think he left us way too soon, unfortunately.
Oh, absolutely. And as we know, the prescription drug thing is a problem in this day and age too. But he suffered from part of it started in the army when they handed out the amphetamines to keep these guys on on watch for 12 hours or whatever. And of course, he saw that stuff as being legit, not it's not a drug. I'm not into drugs. These are all legit prescription drugs. Same thing Michael Jackson and others have fallen foul of. And then the Colonel was quite happy for him to. He was aware of this, but was quite happy for it because when he was making the movies, he wanted Elvis churn those things out in 3 weeks, So he was happy that he was up all the time. So nobody to say no. There's no one to say no.
No one to take him aside and say, enough. Take a break.
Without that, he would have not got that was what was causing the bloating. That and probably cheeseburgers, but
Yeah, he didn't have the best diet of some of the things he used to eat.
Send the plane to get some cheeseburgers.
Yeah, what was these? It's Fool's Gold loaf of bread. It was peanut butter, jelly, and bacon, if I remember correctly. That was his favourite snack. Deep
bacon.
fried.
I mean, who can resist bacon? But yeah, that prescription drug thing was what caused the bloating and all the other problems. I think without that, Elvis would have been in good shape for maybe another 40 years after that. Who knows?
I think so.
We'll never know now, but it's a sad loss because I think he would have, musically, kept working his way back towards relevancy with modern artists.
Yes, I think so too. But we have a huge body of work from him. I think everything we have is brilliant.
What your personal favourites might be, if you've got any, what's your personal favourite songs or?
I've got a few. I mean, I love Burning Love. I think that's a fantastic song. It's Now or Never is one of my favourites. Yeah.
Hunger, burning love.
But Jailhouse Rock, I think, is brilliant.
Yeah.
Can't Help Falling in Love.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are beautiful ballads. I mean, there's no disputing that. We all love the rock and roll, but those were beautiful, beautiful ballads. Love Me Tender. It's Now or Never when he moved to that more smooth pop
Yeah,
sound.
I,
Beautiful.
I like that, and obviously things like Suspicious Minds and Always on My Mind, those kind of songs,
Yeah.
the love songs. Marie's the name of his latest flame, I
Oh
think, is a
yeah.
great
It's a
song.
beautiful song, yeah. I love a lot of the early um, rock and roll stuff. I guess, as I said earlier, I think Big Hunk of Love. I think he's a fantastic rocker with a great guitar on it. Jailhouse Rock, All Shook Up. Blue Suede Shoes. I'm a big Carl Perkins
Yes,
fan too.
Blue
So
Suede Shoes is
just
great.
love it. And no disrespect to Carl Perkins, I love Elvis's version more, which is but the early Sun stuff I love. I guess hard headed woman stuff like that. Just that
All
real
Shook
rock,
Up. Yeah.
all shook up the rock stuff. But then later on you had Can't Help Falling in Love, which is beautiful. You're the devil in disguise. I want you, I need you, I love you. That's one of my favorites. I mean, I guess I could list 100 songs, but then there's a big gap until you get to the later 60s material. So Suspicious Minds, even some of the more mawkish stuff like Don't Cry Daddy, I think he just vocally does great. Kentucky Rain, somebody mentioned, fantastic song, great song, brilliantly performed. And when I was younger, I guess my favorite was The Wonder of You. I'm not so keen on it now, but
Oh, I really love that song. I think that's a
it was
great song.
epic. That was an epic. For you can see him spreading the cape at the end. Yeah. So yeah, he did some great stuff in the late 60s, early 70s. And he got stuff like Tony Joe White material, Polk Saladani, stuff like that. I like that kind of. That's a great song, Polk Saladani. Great guitar riff, and that showed him getting back to his roots a little bit. Yeah,
I think so. I think that's, as you say, where he was happiest.
yeah, yeah. And he wanted to do more material like that. I think So.
I think I will always be a fan, as you say. It's something you grew up listening to, you accidentally come across, but everybody knows who Elvis is, whether you like him or not. He is the king.
And that's the key. And there's probably always going to be one song that everybody likes, even if they don't like Elvis particularly. It's one of these things. He's as I said, I think at the beginning, they call a lot of people icons today that are not icons. An icon is literally someone who you recognize no matter what the representation of them is. I say a sketch drawing of Elvis, that's Elvis. He's
Yes.
an icon.
You think the over the top suits, you think the hair, absolutely. And I think somebody mentioned in the chat as well, he didn't actually have black hair. He dyed his hair. His hair was actually brown.
It was brown, and in fact, it was almost blonde when he was younger. So, blonde Elvis. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, there's just such great. I mean, for me, I think Elvis's albums, some of them are great. The studio albums, I just love putting the compilations on. So I'll put the Sun sessions on, which is the complete gathering of all the Sun material, or I'll put Elvis's 40 greatest hits on, and I love listening to those because I think those you don't have to listen to Elvis albums in the way you'd perhaps want to listen to Sergeant Pepper.
Yes. Yeah, you can jump from era to era and still enjoy the
Exactly.
songs.
Yeah.
And just quickly, let me say a huge thank you to Brandon, the anime guy. Thank you so much. He said, Elvis loved gospel. You can hear it come through those recordings. Elvis is the king. Hail to the king. Long live the king.
Well said,
Well
Brandon.
said.
Well said,
Absolutely.
yeah. He is the king. He will always be the king. Even people who don't like him have to acknowledge he was the king.
I absolutely agree, and I think we've had a fantastic time talking about him as well. I knew I was going to have fun today, because
I'm so
you,
glad you
you
invited
you
me.
can't
Thank
help
you.
but enjoy getting to talk about these sort of shows.
And we,
I
we barely
I'd love
scratched the surface.
we did. I know that's the problem. If I did longer shows, I might have to do that from now on. If we do music based, we're going to have to go for longer. I think.
We could do, yeah. And although later on today I have my own
You
weekly show,
do, you
so
do.
I got to preserve some energy, seeing as you made me get up at this ungodly hour.
But I've had a fantastic time getting to do this today. I'd love to do something like Roy Orbison or Michael Jackson or somebody like that
I
down the line as
certainly would
well.
love to do Roy Orbison. That
Hmm.
would be good.
Roy Orbison would be awesome.
You pick it, I'll be there.
Awesome. And Cam Cam, I agree, said Elvis was a victim of his own stardom, a great ladies' man. He was very isolated and a lonely guy, it seems. His catalogue is unique in its variety. Well said.
Yeah, absolutely correct, Cam. Yeah, he was. He
Absolutely.
was very isolated. He had nobody, truly nobody on a musical level that he could, like the Beatles had each other. He had nobody. That's not to say he was alone, but I think he was lonely.
I think he was, and even with his wife and his family, they never quite understood what he was going through.
And to have all
Absolutely.
that pressure hanging off you as the star, the head of the machine, all these people relying on you, pressure from the colonel to keep churning shit out to make money.
Damn Colonel.
Don't get me started. No, I mean,
TZ Burton says I enjoy Johnny Cash music. Johnny Cash would be a good one to do as well.
it would, yes. And again, a guy who certainly walked his own line
Indeed.
and knew who he was as an artist, which is more it's better than commercial product any day, you know.
I think we've got more to talk about definitely coming up.
Yeah.
What have you got coming up later on today? Because you have got a show this evening,
So
haven't you?
I have my regular weekly show today. It's only talk and roll. I think it's like the seventh or eighth one now.
Nice.
They're working out quite well. 2 p.m. Pacific. Today is I'm not at all being ambitious, but today is the reality special. We're going to talk about the big questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? What is reality? Are we living in a simulation? Is
So
time
we're going
travel
more
possible?
philosophical
We're
tonight.
going metaphysical, philosophical. We are going to answer those questions today.
Nice. Oh, I will be there in the chat. That sounds awesome. I love that.
You're welcome to join me in the show if you have an opinion on these things.
That sounds fantastic. And that's this evening, isn't it?
It's 2 p.m. Pacific time,
2 p.m. Pacific. Okay.
which is
This
5
evening.
East,
This evening for me, but yes,
5
normal
Eastern,
time for everyone else.
10 p.m. for you. God knows what time in Australia, but not that Australia's real, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. Australasia is a fake place; it doesn't exist. So
I've heard that argument. Yes, there is.
it's not real.
It's not actually real. And TZ Burton says it's starting to feel like a simulation. I agree.
The trouble is, it's not a very good simulation. I want to be plugged back into the good one.
Yeah, can we just rewind the last 10 years, please?
That's right.
Yeah.
Can you make me a rock star? Like it's like in the Matrix with what's the actor's name? Anyway, plug me back
Keanu
in.
Reeves, yeah.
Well, no, the guy that the traitor to them.
Oh, crap.
God, I could picture him. Anyway, he says, "Plug me back in, but I want you to make me a rock star." What's his name? Oh my God, that's going right out of my head. I've seen it in a million movies. It'll come back to me.
You come back, yeah, when you don't need it. Always.
Well,
the way.
this is my part of the simulation. It's making me forget shit now.
But I'm looking forward to that.
Cypher.
Thank you, TZ.
The actor, Italian. It'll come back to me. I can picture him in a million things.
But let me say a huge, huge thank you to That 70s Rock Fan for being such an awesome co-host today. Had an absolute blast getting to talk Elvis with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure to ramble on at great length about things I know nothing about.
And if you believe that, guys, you'll believe anything. Yes.
And to show off all my Elvis gear.
Your Elvis gear, and I love the artwork, I've got to admit. When you mentioned it before, I was thinking that's
Joe Panty Liners, that's it. As I call them, Joe Panty Liners.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate that.
I knew someone would know it. Yeah.
The chat always knows. The chat are brilliant.
The chat knows all. It's like the magic 8-ball, the magic chat. But I do appreciate you asking me on, lass. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to doing more of these.
Absolutely.
I'm humbled by your inviting me. Thank you.
My pleasure, as always. So, guys, let me say a massive thank you once more to That 70s Rock Fan for being so awesome today. A huge thank you to everybody who joined us. Massive thank you to everybody who sent super chats. You guys are the best as always. I will be back on Wednesday, and we've got Punk Waddle joining. I'm really looking forward to getting to chat with him. And then we'll be back on Friday as well. And I've got... We're going to be reviewing Vikings Valhalla, so with Max von Priestley, so that should be interesting as well.
Good stuff.
So lots of stuff coming. We're going to have a great week. So guys, have a fantastic rest of your Monday. God, getting ahead of myself.
A couple of days already. The simulation is a glitch in it already.
There's a glitch in the Matrix, and we're in it absolutely. Have a fantastic rest of your Monday, guys. Hope to see you around. And again, if you're not subscribed to That 70s Rock Fan, please do, because he has a fantastic channel.
Thank you, my dear. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, guys.